native plants. How do we use native plants in our landscape designs? So when we're designing, we're creating an abstraction of nature, and it can be naturalistic or it can be formal. These images are all from the Wildflower Center down in Austin, but these are called the Homeowner Inspiration Gardens, and they're designed to show that you can have these different looks, these different aesthetic looks, but still use native plants. So the one on the upper right is, very symmetrical. You've got the paver pathway. You've got the little hedge plantings, pretty formal looking. The one on the bottom right is supposed to be sort of more traditional. You've got your turf, although that's buffalo grass, surrounded by perennial gardens and then some trees. And then the bottom left is showing that much more naturalistic design. So again, they're native plants. They can be, some of them can be sheared or hedged or pollarded or whatever. They're not gonna, respond the same way as if you had introduced plants, but the point is that you can design in such a way so that it matches whatever aesthetic you're looking for. So again, this is what you're after. Highly doubt this, but if somebody really wants to try to replicate something like this with all native plants, that would be pretty cool. People would want to see that. So you can do what makes sense for you. Of course, this is what we have. This is a natural field of wildflowers. So generally speaking, we're going for something more like that, typically, if we're native plant people. But here again, these are native plants. The Waterwise garden up top there at Denver, those are not all native plants, but a lot. And then down on the bottom, those are all native plants. You can see you've got the patio sitting area, you've got perennial gardens, perennial beds. So back to sketching it out. I cannot stress this enough. This is what kind of stalls some people out, because again, they think, oh, I can't, it's not going to look good, or I can't draw. This is not for anyone else except you. You're the only one that needs to be able to interpret it. It can be messy. It's just as long as it makes sense to you. So you've got your site analysis map where you've identified, your sunny areas, your shady areas, existing plants, things you might need to work around. You might have like an air conditioning unit that you'd like to block, or you want to have a little bit of a wind break or whatever it is. So you're planning out that, and then you actually start to create the design, and that would be more like what's on the left there. And I said this earlier, but again, just to reiterate, try different options, try things out differently. Like you might have plants that you want to try out, move them around, but do it while you're still on paper, and that way you can really you can sort of work through things. Maybe you have a rain garden over in the northeast corner in one iteration, and then you move it to the southwest corner in another iteration, or you have, whatever it might be. Try different things and see what works, because it really, once you get it going and try a few different options, it becomes easier, and then you're going to save yourself time, because you're not you're just thinking it all through, rather than getting everything installed and then being like, oh, I didn't think about that. I'm blocking my view out of this window, or whatever it might be. And some of that still might happen, but the more you can think through it, the better. So when we're talking about plants, there was a study that is often looked to that was done in Colorado Springs, where they compared the water use between traditional and xeric landscapes, and the water savings was huge. It ranged from 15 to 63%, which is a big range. But even if you're on the 15 to 20% savings, like on the low end of that, that's great. Native plants tend to be xeric plants. So if you get a plant list that is xeric plants, oftentimes it's packed with natives. And that reminds me, during our little break, I put quite a few links in the chat. So the first one is sources of native plants, and then next one are just plant list, perennials, shrubs, grasses, and trees. And for the person who asked about native plants for clay, it listed off a bunch: goldenrod and columbine, and well, I can't remember the other ones, but you can, it lists off, you know, well drained or clay or that sort of thing. So go ahead and take a look there. And then of course, native plants, they're going to take fewer resources and they support local fauna, which is so important. Natives can be incorporated into an existing landscape, which is good to know. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you move into a place and it's got, you know, a full landscape of introduced plants, typical horticultural plants, and you want to slowly over time create a new design or replace things as they die out with native plants, that's absolutely doable. And then when you're looking at how to pair the plants, you can do things, you can choose combinations of plants that actually grow together naturally. So I love using this picture. That's me and my grandmother up at their cabin just west of Laramie, Wyoming. You can see the plants are just going off. It was a great wildflower year. And so you can look for inspiration like that. You go to Rocky Mountain National Park, or you go to, you know, Pawnee Buttes, or Pawnee grasslands, and see what's naturally growing together. Or you can plant what looks good together. Again, you can see the complementary colors there, the purple of the penstemon and the yellow of the gaillardia. There you go. There's a list of everything that's going on in that picture there. So you can plant things that look good together. And then really importantly, you want to plant things that have like needs. So if you're planting things that are going to naturally grow together, they're probably going to have like needs. Where you run into an issue is if you're simply going off aesthetics and you say, oh, I think these would look pretty together, but they actually have different needs, then you're going to run into some issues. So you want to make sure whatever plants you choose, they have the same sun requirements, the same water requirements, the same soil requirements. You want to make sure that you have seasonal interest and an extended bloom time. So you want things that bloom when you're creating your plant palette. You want things that bloom as early in the season as possible, all the way through the spring and summer, and then as late in the season as possible. That's for us aesthetically. It's great to have blooming plants. It's pretty, but also especially for our wildlife and for pollinators. You don't want to attract them to an urban habitat that's just really going off in the spring and then has absolutely nothing for 2 months in the summer. So extend that bloom time. You want to, again, look at your colors, choose your colors well. Every once in a while, I talk to somebody who says, oh, I planted, you know, plant A right next to plant B, and the colors absolutely clashed. Like they bloom at the same time. I didn't realize they were going to bloom at the same time, and the colors just look awful together. That doesn't happen too often, I don't think. But again, you want to take it into consideration. Easier to do that before everything is installed. Again, pay attention to texture of the plants. You want to think about that exposure. How big is the plant going to get? Whether you're talking native plants or introduced plants, you want to design and install for the mature plant size. People run into all kinds of issues when they don't pay attention to that. It looks really sparse when they first get it planted, and so they pack a few more in, and then they just get crowded out, and the plants don't do well. You can also think about function. So you can see I have noise, screen, and food there. So noise, you might live next to a busy road. You could use plants, like layers of plants, again, shrubs and grasses and those sorts of things to soften the noise. You could screen. You might have a view that you don't care for, so you can use taller plants to screen that view. And then food, whether it's for you, there are native plants that are edible that people like to plant and then harvest, or maybe it's food, again, for that wildlife. Again, thinking about structure. So you create that sort of skeleton of the space, whether it's through hardscape or shrubs and trees. And then you want to think about maintenance. Maintenance is really important. In lots of projects, maintenance is what kills it. Not literally kills the plants, but if you have a vision of what would be really beautiful to you and you would really love to have in your yard, but it turns out it's a really high maintenance landscape, then you're probably not going to enjoy it if you don't have the time to get out there. If you have all the time in the world and you just love to putz around in the garden, then maybe a high maintenance landscape is going to make more sense for you. But you just want to kind of think through what your plants are going to need. Granted, native plants tend to require much less maintenance, but there's still some. And then, of course, water needs are going to be super important. So here are a few more kind of inspiration pictures of plant combinations. So that's Eriogonum umbellatum. That's the little yellow sulfur flower with Artemisia ludoviciana, the prairie sage. And we've got some penstemon and some sneezeweed. Again, you've got the purple and the yellow. A lot of our native plants are purpley blues and yellows. So that's a combination you're going to see a lot. Here's another one, Rudbeckia, which is black or brown-eyed Susan, again with that penstemon. This is really great because you've got a variety of bloom types, right? You've got the Asteraceae, the daisy-like flower, or the sunflower-like flower, and then the penstemon, which has a very different look, so it's much more interesting to the eye. Here you've got the geum, the little prairie smoke in the front there. I think that might be one that can handle some clay soils. And then the red twig dogwood in the background, that shrub with the white flowers. You've got Indian rice grass down in the front there with their really pretty seed heads. Desert 4 o'clock in the back with the pink. And then evening primrose, that pop of yellow. And then here are a couple of different grasses that complement each other nicely. So again, 2 native grasses, little blue stem and blue grama, but they look very, very different. They have different seed heads, they have different colors. So you can do some really fun combinations of grasses too. Then if we look at, I'm just going through a handful of plants to consider that are hopefully mostly available. And, people often ask about shrubs for shrubs and small native trees. So mountain mahogany is a lovely one. They get the really awesome, we get the awesome fuzzy swirly seed heads. And you've got the Mahonia. Chokecherry is a good one. You need to have plenty of space for that because it suckers and it creates sort of a thicket. But excellent wildlife plant. It gets white flowers in the spring. Bees and pollinating flies really like that. And then of course it gets the chokecherries later on that lots of birds and other wildlife love. But again, you do have to have the space for that. Wafer ash is one that you don't see a ton. That's on the bottom left there. It's a small tree. Has kind of when the leaves are crushed, it has kind of a like a citrusy smell, and it gets a pretty little seed head. 3-lobed sumac, Rus trilobata, is a good, that picture actually makes it look kind of bigger than it is. It can be kind of a low growing little shrub. And then New Mexico privet is another one that seems to be gaining popularity for landscapes. Then a couple of our trees. So Rocky Mountain juniper on the left there, that is a picture from Centennial Gardens in Denver, which is, it's a public garden with, it doesn't have all native plants, but it does have a lot of them. And it's a very formal design. So again, just an example that you can have a formal garden with native plants. And then of course we've got blue spruce, and we've got aspen, and there are lots of others, but people often ask, what are some native trees that I could plant like down in the Front Range area? But of course it's important to remember that there are not a lot of native trees, deciduous trees, to this area. So you may have to branch out into some non-natives just because of our historically what has been here. Okay, so super important, of course, this is just a general gardening and design guideline. Things grow. I already mentioned this, but you have to design and install to the mature size. You can see the little graphic there, wrong tree, wrong place, and better choices. You can see on the left, they've got those evergreens planted right in front of the house, blocking all the windows. If you're planting under the power lines, you don't want something that's going to grow too tall, because the power company will not care what your plant is, and they will just come in and cut it down. It's really a good idea to think about planting, depending on your site, of course. You can do more dense plantings on the north side of your home to protect from weather during the winter. If you want to have trees and shade, you can plant those on the south and west side of your home, so that during the summertime you get shade and it helps with cooling costs, but then those deciduous trees drop their leaves and you get solar gain in the winter. So again, thinking through all of those things is key. And again, the placement and replacement of plants. These grasses, these lovely ornamental grasses with fancy seed heads, but you can see how they had to be chopped back. If you look down the sidewalk a little more, you can see what the plant is trying to do, wants to be doing, but it's flopping over into the sidewalk. So you really want to make sure you think about the size and the spacing so that you don't have to whack back on something and then it doesn't look good. Here's another example of a goofy haircut on a plant because it was way too big for the tiny little space it was planted in. I touched on microclimates just a little bit, but you can create microclimates and you can really play with microclimates. So if you have a planting space on the north side of your house, you're going to be able to plant things that need a little more moisture versus the south side. And then if you think about the east side of your house, it's getting that nice gentle morning sun versus the west side, which is just going to get that beating afternoon sun in the summertime. So you can really do a lot with microclimates. And again, layers of plants will create microclimates for the next layer down. So that is not necessarily changing what kind of plants you can plant, but it's going to play into how much water you apply, and just like what kind of ground treatment you do, what kind of mulch, that sort of thing. They can actually sort of shade root zones for each other. Okay, quickly going to touch on irrigation. You don't necessarily have to have an irrigation system, but you're probably going to have to hand water at least for the first year or two through the establishment period. If you already have an existing irrigation system, like if you have a turf yard and you're wanting to take that out and convert to a native landscape, you're going to have to convert that irrigation system because you're not going to want those rotor sprinkler heads anymore. Drip is going to be more ideal than sprinklers. But whatever you have, the irrigation fittings and fixtures and parts and pieces have to be adjusted. So both the placement of the irrigation and the amount of water that you put down. Ideally, you're going to get all your native plants installed. You're going to have irrigation on them or hand water for the first few years, and then you can back off. And maybe only in really extreme dry years are you going to actually have to water. That's the ideal situation, but you never know what's going to happen. So just really paying attention to your irrigation is key, and you can actually save a ton of water. Overall, gardening, the landscaping industry would be able to save tons and tons, thousands of gallons of water if their irrigation heads were properly maintained. So many of them are just not, and they waste water. Hydrozones is the idea of irrigating by area rather than plant. So with that, as you're doing your design, you're thinking about grouping plants with similar water needs together and then irrigating appropriately. So some people, even if they're going to all natives, they might have a few plants that they just absolutely love, that are more, they like a little more water. So maybe you still have those, but the idea is that maybe you keep those closer to your house because you can see them more easily. You can hand water them to give them a little extra water. But you have these zones, and they're not necessarily in concentric circles like that. But your really, really xeric plants are going to probably do better further away at the end of the irrigation line, or where you don't necessarily see it all the time, and it might have to go through a bit of drought and it'll be okay. So again, it's going to just create more efficiency in your irrigating if you use hydrozones. And then mulches. Mulch is important. It helps with water conservation. It helps keep weeds down. There are different types of mulch that can be used, but most commonly we use wood chip or bark mulch or gravel. So we're talking about organic or inorganic mulch. Here you can see bark mulch, pole shavings. It really depends on, that picture there was taken at Chatfield Gardens, Denver Botanic Gardens down in Chatfield. And you want to match your mulch to your plant. So this is down at Kendrick Lake, which a lot of people are familiar with, and you can see all that nice gravel mulch. So with xeric plants and native plants, a lot of them do not want to have moisture at the crown. So right where the roots go down and the plant parts go up, right there is what we call the crown, right at the soil level. And if you have nice thick bark mulch, because you've heard that you want to put, a good 3 to 4 inch layer to keep weeds down and to keep moisture in the soil, but that's packed right up next to a really xeric plant, it's going to rot out. So you want to make sure you understand what kind of mulch is going to be best for your plant. And oftentimes our native plants are going to like some squeegee or some pea gravel, maybe a little bit larger rock for that gravel. People say, a lot of people are like, oh, well, doesn't rock get really hot? Isn't that going to be a problem? Yes, rock does get hot. But again, if you have the planting density correct, then you're not going to have huge open areas of rock. And in fact, bark and wood mulch can actually get really hot too. So, it absorbs that heat. I'm starting to see this kind of thing around a lot, and quite frankly, it confuses me. It's not a great idea to mix and match your mulches like that, having that little tiny wood mulch ring in the middle of gravel. So don't do this. I would say just pick one or the other, whichever is more appropriate for the site. And again, this rock that you see here, yeah, that's a lot of open rock. That planting density, those plants are fairly new and they're going to grow in, they're going to fill in. But if they're not filling in enough, then you're going to want to increase your plants a bit more. Okay, so this is getting to some of the questions about, like, if you have a gravel pathway versus flagstone versus sidewalk. Permeable pavers are awesome. They're not super easy to find, but you can find them. And it is simply a walking surface, a paver that allows water to infiltrate. So with this type of gardening and this type of landscape design, we're really trying to look at all the ways that our landscape and our site functions. And as I've mentioned, getting that water to stay on site and infiltrate into the soil is really important. So permeable pavers are great. You can do something like this, flagstone pathways. Water is going to be able to go in between the pavers. You can do things like this. Again, this is just sort of some inspiration pictures. So, you can have those square pavers. Here's another flagstone patio. This I just pulled off the internet. I thought it was kind of fun. You could have a big chess set, so you can really have fun with it and enjoy the space and be creative. But finding ways to allow water to infiltrate into the soil is a key part of your design. And then finishing touches. So if any of you are familiar with Martha Tatro, she talks a lot about creating intentional spaces. And so, because again, a lot of times when we start converting to native plants and having it be more habitat, it does look sort of messy to people, and they think, oh, what are they doing? When are they going to pull those weeds? But if you have something like garden art, a bird bath, old found objects, farm equipment, that sort of thing, and place those strategically, it looks intentional. And these types of landscapes tend to be more accepted. So I think this is kind of a fun added area that you can build into your design. Now, for some more design ideas and help, Plant Select has some already created designs by Laura Springer Ogden that you can go on. And again, it could just be sort of inspiration. You can see how far apart she spaces her plants, or what kind of plants she groups together. They're not going to be all native plants, but again, just a place to get some ideas and some inspiration. On the CONIP's website, there are the low water native plant guides for Colorado gardens, and those were divided into 5 areas of the state. So there's the Front Range and foothills, mountains, we have prairie and plains, the southeast, and then the western slope below 7,000 feet. And in those, there are plant lists, pretty extensive plant lists that list soil type, they list what kind of pollinators and wildlife they might attract. And then we have these little sample designs that kind of let you do kind of a paint by number sort of thing. So you can see the photos of the plants and then what that design is. So you might have a space that kind of fits that bill and you think, okay, I'm just going to try this. It's already designed for me. But you can figure out how to incorporate it into your space. So, some of you might be thinking, oh, I'm just going to redo this small part of my yard. Then you're not necessarily needing to do like the whole big site analysis and recreate everything. If you're just redoing a small area and just doing a new planting bed, then that's an easier thing to tackle. But if you're eventually wanting to do redo your whole space, you can do the whole site analysis, kind of get a game plan for the whole space, but then actually do the installation in sort of bite-sized pieces. You can chunk it out and do it over a number of years. It doesn't have to all happen at once. Okay, I spoke about this a little bit, but if you do decide to work with a professional, I still encourage you to go through the steps that I outlined. Go through that site analysis process, think through the plants, think through whatever hardscape you might want to do. You want to find your likes and your dislikes. That's really important. And if you do hire a designer, you want to do kind of an informal interview with them. You want to make sure you understand what you're getting from them. I have often heard of people thinking that they're going to get more than they actually do for what was agreed upon. So, is the person going to work with you? Do they want to be a little more hands-off? Do the styles and aesthetics align? So usually people have a portfolio that they can show you. So you want to make sure that fits. Maybe they have sort of a specialty area. You might find somebody who really loves doing habitat gardening or loves working with native plants or doing xeriscapes. So you want to pair up with the right person. And then again, what do they provide? Do they just provide the concept, kind of a rough idea that looks pretty, but you can't actually tell, like, this is how many plants I need and this is exactly where they go? So you want to do your due diligence and interview those designers and make sure you understand what you're going to get for whatever their fee might be. APLD, the Association of Professional Landscape Designers. This is a great place to get inspiration because they put a lot of beautiful photos of designs on their website, but you can also find designers there. If you have a little bit of a trickier space, you might need a little more engineering done, grading, retaining walls, those sorts of things. You may need to work with a landscape architect. So there's the ASLA. And then the ALCC is Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado. Some people want to do the design and installation themselves, but maybe they need help with the hardscape or the irrigation. This is a good place to find people that can help with that work. They have a Find a Pro page, and you can kind of filter it out and find a good match there. Okay, so this brings us to our final few slides, designing a native plant garden. So you want to keep in mind those principles and elements of design. It might seem, I would say that some people have great success with just sort of winging it and kind of making it up as they go, but you really can save yourself time, save yourself money, and get to a final finished product a little more quickly if you're a little thoughtful about it in the beginning. Do that site analysis, figure out what you have, what's existing before you start to change it, sketch it out, make sure you create those different sketches. And then through those simple earthworks, you can help keep water on site. That's going to make your whole space more functional and have more ecological value. Then you're going to choose your plant palette, get the installation going, and just have fun with it, really. It can be a lot of work, but it can be a lot of fun. And, if you're in this type of class and you're obviously already thinking about it, so fun is the key. Sometimes I feel like I get to the end of a class like this and it's like, whew, that sounds like a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun. So hopefully you can have fun with it. I like to end with this quote from Frederick Law Olmsted. He is considered the father of American landscape architecture. He designed Central Park and other famous gardens back east. Somebody from one of his sons or something actually designed, I believe, the oval on the CSU campus. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's right. So he has this quote: "Good garden design employs the mind without fatigue, tranquilizes it, yet enlivens it, and thus gives the effect of refreshing rest and reinvigoration." So my hope for you all is that you try this out, you try different designs, you get things installed, and you just create an absolutely wonderful native plant oasis in your own yards. And I will leave this slide up for a little bit. I already shared some of these links in the chat, but these are some helpful websites where you can get plant lists and maybe some inspiration photos. And with that, we technically have 2 minutes left, but I'm happy to hang out for a little while and answer as many questions as I can.
Well, thank you so much, Deryn. We really appreciate it. And folks, the slides came in your email, but I will also send them again, and we'll make sure we repeat all of these links in a follow-up email. We do have some questions. And so let's go here. Let's go back to the concept of soil testing. Can you describe like how a person would test their yard? How many areas should you test? Should you aggregate those, etc.?
Yeah. I'm glad that somebody asked that, because that means they were thinking, "Ooh, I better do that." So if you go to Ward Laboratories, or if you go to the Soil Plant Water Lab at CSU, they will have instructions listed for you. But basically, you're going to take it from different areas in your yard, and you kind of want to do like a zigzag pattern of whatever area you're looking at planting, and you collect that in a bag all together, mix it up, dry it out. You usually need about 2 cups, so it's not a lot, and you want to go about 6 inches deep if you can. You mix that up, dry it out, send it in, and they send you back the analysis. If you're doing, it depends again on your site. If you're doing front yard and backyard, you might want to do 2 different ones. If you're doing the sides of your backyard, probably just one soil test is going to be okay. Unless you have a really, really large site, you can probably get away with one soil test. Unless you know that for some reason you just have very different soils on your site, then it's a good idea to do more than one.
Well, thanks. And now let's think about, this question is about how can you add natives and xeric plants around existing trees that need more water? So like we have maples, and for example, how do you deal with that irrigation puzzle?
That's a really tricky one. And it's one, so, there's a lot of movement, I guess I'll call it right now, for removing turf, right? Like the state legislature passed a bill that said they would give money to people who remove turf, and there are cities and municipalities that are saying remove your turf. And people are converting to xeriscapes and native landscapes, but to this person's point, we've got these trees, and the trees provide a lot of value. And they are often forgotten. So people think, oh, I'm going to rip out my turf or rip out whatever was there and just have xeric plants, and I only have to water. I'm only relying on the natural precipitation. The trees are going to suffer. So you need to either have a plan for hand watering, have a plan for different irrigation zones. The point is you have to think about it and you have to have a plan, because the trees really will suffer. And if you want to keep those trees, which generally people do, they provide shade, they provide, all kinds of things, then you will need to pay attention to that and supply them with supplemental water. But it's tricky because, generally speaking, you're not going to plant things right up under the trunk of a tree. Give it a nice layer of wood chip mulch if you can, and then plant around it, not right up under it. But you do need to supply supplemental water if the rest of your landscape is going to be using much less